So if you have any questions or chat, I know that we're going to have a couple of questions where we're going to ask for some feedback during the program. So if you want to go ahead and locate your chat box, that's on the bottom of your screen. If you're using a computer, it should be right about here, I'm guessing. So you can go ahead and respond to any questions there. And I'm going to go ahead and let Chloe get started. And if you have any questions for at the end, I'll pop back on and I'll read your questions aloud. We do have a small group, so I can also unmute you if you'd like as well. So thank you for joining us this evening, and go ahead, Chloe.
Awesome. Thank you guys for joining tonight. I'm super excited that you wanted to talk about money on a Tuesday night. I know that's not something that's always super exciting to talk about. And I know a lot of the times too, we can feel a lot of shame or embarrassment for not knowing enough about money or not knowing what we feel like we should have known. So good job for coming tonight. And I'm super excited to talk to you guys about values-based budgeting. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right, let's see here. Okay, can everybody see my screen? Hopefully you'll see values-based budgeting. We'll take the silence as a yes.
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, so tonight we're going to cover quite a few things. First, I'm just going to do a quick little intro so you know a little bit of who I am and where I come from. Then we're going to do a little bit of thought work where we're going to kind of figure out why we spend money the way that we do. And we're going to try and use that as a way for us to change how we spend money. And then after that, we're going to dive right into that budget making magic. Just as a heads up, the spreadsheets and the templates that I use are Google. So you'll want to have a Gmail login if you want to use my templates. You don't have to use my templates. You can also use a notebook and a piece of paper if you'd like. Then after that, we're going to dive a little bit into some budgeting tips. And then after that, these are things, if we have some time, we'll dive a little bit into investing and debt payoff. So originally, sorry, I'm skipping ahead to the icebreaker. So about me, I run a blog called Clo Bear. It originally started off as something where I'd use it to talk about things like mental health and personal growth and relationships. And eventually got to the point where I really couldn't ignore the fact that I was bad with money because it was impacting all areas of my life. And so in 2018, I decided to finally face my lack of budgeting skills as well as my lack of money skills, and started really educating myself on how to become good with money. Where I was in October 2018 is I was saddled with about $70,000 in debt between student loans and a car loan. I had about $2,000 between my checking and savings, and I had about 10K total in my retirement accounts despite having worked several years. And in those 2 years since I started budgeting and just really paying attention to my money and slowly learning, I've paid out about $40,000 in debt while paying for a ton of different travel, whether by paying with credit card points or cash. And I've also saved about $100,000 for retirement. And that's with making a 5-figure income until last year. So currently where I'm at now is I'm on track to retire by the time I'm 46. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the FIRE community, the Financial Independence Retire Early community. But that's what sort of got me inspired to really get into my money and to start saving about 50% of my income or more, so that if I want to, by the time I'm 46, I can retire from my normal 9-to-5 job and be completely debt-free by 30. So I tell you all of this not to brag. I tell you all of this because I want it to be known that it is possible to get on the right track, even within a short period of time. I went from 2 years ago knowing absolutely nothing about money, being terrible with money, and now I'm on track to retire by the time I'm 46, which is pretty cool. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how I did that today, but I want to set that up and help you all realize, like, it's totally possible to go from being bad with money to pretty good with money. So because this is such a heavy topic, I'd really like to get some interaction from everybody, and also just set up this as a totally safe space to talk about money. I know a lot of us are feeling similar ways. And so originally I thought we would have our video cameras on, but we do not. So instead of raising your hand in the chat box, I want you to put yes if any of these things resonate with you. So find that chat box and we're gonna get started real quick here. Okay? All right, so type in yes if you feel like you should know more about money than you currently do. Okay. Got some people coming in, great. Number 2, type in yes if you have student loan debt. Okay, so we got a mix, that's good. Okay, type in yes if you have credit card debt or some other kind of consumer debt. Okay, type in yes if you never learned anything useful about money in school. That was a fast yes on that one. Okay, next up, type in yes if your parents didn't teach you about money. Okay, next up, type in yes if you're feeling a little nervous or a little like you're dreading this workshop. Oh, nobody's nervous. That's fantastic. Oh, just kidding. Okay, awesome. Thank you, Hannah. All right, next, type in yes if you feel like you're bad at money. Okay, type in yes if you feel like you're afraid of money. All right, and last one, type in yes if you feel like not managing your money is holding you back in some way. All right, awesome. Thank you guys for participating in that. I really appreciate it because I feel like it's really important to kind of set the stage and let you know where others are at too, and that you're not the only one who feels the way that you feel or feels like you should know more about money at this point. So the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna dive a little bit into why we spend money the way that we do. And we're going to do that with a money story. So a money story is basically the impact your childhood had on your views of money now. Was it plentiful? Was it always available? Did your parents never talk of it? Those kind of things. The reason that this is important is because you may identify some false truths you've told yourself about money up until this point. So for example, when I was a kid, I would get $1 every week. And like, we're talking like little kid. My very first money memory is my parents would always give me $1 every week for an allowance. And we could go, my brothers and I could go to the store and we could either spend that dollar or we could decide to save it. Every time I went to the store, I spent it, and I spent it on like this tiny little like wax makeup kit that like was forgotten about and eaten or something by the next day. Whereas my brother, he got really good at just saving those dollars, and eventually he was able to buy this cool robot thing. And so eventually I internalized this truth that boys were good with money and girls were bad with money. And that's not something that I even broke down and began to address until my 20s. Another example is throughout my life, my parents were always stressed out about money. they would often only argue about money. I never really heard them just talk about money. And it always felt like we didn't have enough. So my mom would go into these phases of save, 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 only to just spend and use credit cards and get into debt when that willpower kind of ran out. What I learned from that was it's totally normal to spend money that you don't have. Money is scary and hard to manage. And I could, as long as I would have periods of my life where I'd save, 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 I could then just spend, 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 which is something that is a pattern that I started to continue throughout my life and never actually figured out, okay, how do I actually manage this money instead of just spending it all or being absolutely terrified to spend it. So what I'm gonna have you do is if you have a piece of paper, I think it's really important to write this down. And I know some people are calling in tonight with their significant others. So maybe this is a good conversation starter to have right now or to write about. But I've got up here on the screen some questions for some thought work before we dive into the actual budget making money. So take some time. We're going to go through and I would like you to write out the answers to this or have this conversation with your significant other while you're sitting there. Also, not a bad idea to write some of it down because you might notice some things. And then at the end, we will have an opportunity if there's something you'd like to share from it, we can share as a group. I know people can unmute their mics, so that's an option as well. So the first question is, how did your guardian spend or save money? When you're done with this question, go ahead and write done in the chat box, and then we'll go question by question. That way we're all on the same page and same pace. All right, thanks guys. So second question, what was the feeling about money in the home you grew up in? Was it stressful? Was it something you just never talked about? Was it money's plentiful and everything's fine? Have this opportunity to write this down or discuss with your partner. And then when you're finished, go ahead and write done in the chat box. All right, next question. What are some of your fears about spending money or budgeting? Again, just hit that done in the. Oh, wait, I skipped one. Sorry, go back. What is your earliest memory about money? This is a fun one, so I can't skip that.
And when it comes time to share, you can either type your comments in the chat box or I can unmute you if you raise your hand. And if you type them in the chat box, I'm happy to read them aloud so that the viewers on YouTube can also listen to the conversation as well.
All right, it looks like most people are done. So, what are some of your fears about spending money or budgeting? All right, what messages did your guardians pass down to you about money? And the last question is, well, before we get to the last is, do you remember hearing your parents talk about or fight about money? Okay, and then this is the big question. This is the one that glues it all together. How is all of this affecting you now, and how you budget and how you spend money or how you save money, or even how you view debt or how you view credit cards? Take a moment to really think about this one. And when you're ready, go ahead and write and done. And if you would like to share anything about your money story, let us know in the chat or raise your hand and Annie will unmute you. And the only reason I ask if anybody wants to share is because oftentimes people will see some of their money story in somebody else's money story and not have even realized that was part of their money story. So I often find that sharing, it's really helpful just because you can help somebody else realize something, but also no pressure. All right, I think that's most everyone. I think we still have two who might still be working. Does anybody want to share? Totally cool if not, totally cool if yes. All right, we're gonna move on to the next slide then. Okay, so similar to figuring out what our money story is and why that's important, we also really need to talk about why you even care to start managing your money in the first place. Managing your money ultimately is something that is a marathon and not necessarily something that tomorrow you're just going to wake up and be good and you're going to have reached all of your money goals. The why is so important because it'll keep you going when you feel like blowing the $2,000 you saved for a Costa Rica trip, or I guess pre-coronavirus times, but anyway. So we're gonna take a second to think about what our why is. And this one I think is super important to actually write down because this is something you're gonna be able to come back to when you wanna go off budget or when you just wanna give up. For me, it's like, I want to wake up in the morning and take my time. I want a peaceful morning. I want to be able to decide what it is I'm going to work on. And I want to be slowly moving throughout the day. And money to me is freedom. And money to me is also that time and the ability to choose the type of work that I want to do, as well as the ability to say no to the type of work I don't want to do. So I encourage you to think about, from the start to the finish of your day, what do you want that to look like? And again, as per usual, when you are finished, just hit no or done. Also think about too, how will money not being an issue in your life improve it? What are the things that it'll allow you to do that you can't do now? How will your health be? How will your mental health be? How will you sleep at night? All of those things. And if you would like to share, you could write a 1-sentence summary of why you want to manage your money in the comment box. So I would love to know. I like it. The dones are taking a while this time. It means you guys are really thinking about it. All right. Again, another opportunity if anybody would like to share. If not, we'll move on to the next slide. All right, this group's like, we just want to get to the budgeting, Chloe, get us to the budgeting. All right, so what we're going to talk about today is values-based budgeting. The way that that's a little bit different from normal budgeting or like the 50-30-20 rule of budgeting is that ultimately you're not following any arbitrary rules. You are following your priorities. You're following your goals. Oh, and we had a share. I want to manage my money well to be sure I have enough to live on down the road. And I also would like to have more money for home improvements, donating to those in need, etc. Thank you so much for sharing. That is a fantastic why. So anyway, back to values-based budgeting, and thank you again for sharing. So I like values-based budgeting because it completely allows me to live the type of life that I want to live right now, rather than waiting for a time in my life where I'm like, oh, I'm debt-free, or, oh, I am now making this amount of money, or X, Y, Z. I'm able to reallocate my resources to the things that matter most to me, financial independence being one of those things, and paying off debt being one of those things as well. It does not have any of those arbitrary rules of like, you must spend 50% on all of the essentials that yada, 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 or 20% on rent or whatever it is. Because if you don't value spending that money on something that a rule tells you should, then you shouldn't have to be focused on spending money on that thing. So that's what we're going to be focusing on today. The reason I like it too is it really helps you maximize your best life right now. So that's what we'll be diving into today. And in order to get started on that, we have to know what we value. And I think this will be a really interesting conversation for those who are working with their significant other right now and calling in with that. But the first thing we're going to do is we're going to list off all our highest values. So you can do that as an individual, or you can do that as a couple. But I think it's honestly important to do both. What do you value as an individual? What does your significant other value as an individual? And then what do you value as a couple? So these are some of the things on here that I threw up. But what am I missing here? If there's something that I'm missing on here, throw it in the chat box, because it may be something that someone else is like, oh yeah, I didn't think about that. That's something that I truly value as well. One of the things too is that these are one of the ways to think about it is, what would you want to be paid with if you weren't paid in money from your employer? So for me, I would love to be paid with debt freedom, time, and travel. What would that be for you? And as you're writing this out, if you can kind of prioritize those values too, it's also very helpful for the next steps that we're going to get into. So if it's like, my number one thing is time, my second thing is travel, my third thing is I want to have a nice home. So what are those things for you? And what are those things for you guys as couples, for those of you who have called in with a significant other? So as per usual, hit done when you are finished, but also please feel free to add anything that I'm missing from this list in here. Maybe one of the things that I don't have on here is philanthropic support. Music. Love it. Thanks, Annie. She said she added education and learning. Maybe having a dog who's currently cleaning herself on the couch right now. No. Stop. Does anyone want to share their top 3? Love it. Thank you, Alan. He said, financial stability, nice home, technology, education and learning, and time. And those are in order of importance. Anybody else want to share? Time, travel, and family time. All right, so just as important as listing off the things you do value, it is also important to list off of the things that you don't value. So this is just a list. If there are things that you do value on here, that's totally fine. But this is important because these are going to be some things that you're going to be able to look at your budget and say, okay, I said that I value travel, but I'm spending $600 a month drinking and eating out. So it's going to be one of those things where you look at the opportunities within the spending that you've already got in place and seeing, okay, where can I actually cut back in here in order to make room in my budget for the things that actually matter to me. So again, if there's things that I'm missing here, add them in the chat box, because this is only with my own imagination that I created this list. But again, it's that whole idea of reallocating the resources that we already have in order to maximize on our own life experiences. So for me, eating out and drinking out was one that I started cutting back on. I don't value things like musical festivals, so I put that money elsewhere. I actually ended up selling my car because transportation just isn't something that I value. And I had a car and I wasn't using it. And so I decided to sell it and invest that. And since I invested what I sold on it, I've made probably 40% of that investment. And it's been able to go towards other things that I do value in my life, like paying off debt. Possible ads, pet related, home improvement. Don't let that fool you. Elise definitely values her pets. All right, as we get closer to finishing this part, feel free to share your list as well. And again, I would also encourage you to think about, am I using the word should? Because if you're thinking, I should value this more, but I actually don't, think about this as you're designing your ideal life. So all that shoulding really doesn't matter. If you're finding yourself saying should, just scrap it and instead focus on what actually is and what actually exists for you. Okay, we've got Anne, I don't value new gadgets, knickknacks, technology, and TV streaming. Alan says, I've cut back on most of these already, so I'm probably doing okay in that regard. I'd still encourage you to think about the things, even if those are the things you have cut back on, make sure you're aware of what those things are. All right, I think that's most everybody. So we are going to move on to looking at our current spending. So for this, you're going to want to pull up your debit card statements. You're going to want to pull up your credit card statements and go through these transactions. What we're going to be doing right now is looking at those and circling or identifying some categories that are already existing within those. So if you've got, I've up on the screen, I have some general categories. If you're a visual person, you can use different highlighters or things like that to start highlighting things that are alike to see what your current spending is like. I recommend going through the last month. If you want, you can do from the last 30 days from today, or you can go for the month of June so that you're making sure you've got everything in 1 month. But right now we're going to go through those spending reports and start thinking about what categories are already showing up. These are just some of them, but if there's other categories, and the way that I think about categories is if there's anything you want to keep track of. So if you saw in that values list and don't values list that there are things in there that you really want your resources going to or not going to, it's not a bad idea to make a category for them in your budget. So for example, people have categories for education and learning, new experiences, dating, paying off debt, saving money, emergency funds, any of those goals or values that you want to work in there. Or on the flip side, if there's something that you know you might be spending a lot of money on that you want to start cutting back on, it's an excellent opportunity to put that as a category item and track what you're spending on that every month. A good example is drinking or eating out or video game in-store purchases. I don't know, clearly I don't play video games, but what are those things? If it's knickknacks, if it's material goods, those are the kind of things that maybe you want to create a category for. So I know this part can be a little bit confusing, so please feel free to raise your hand and ask any questions. But right now we're going to go through those spending reports and start putting together those categories.
Just so as a note, if you have questions and you'd like them to remain anonymous, you can use the Q&A box and you can just send those in and I can read those out loud.
Yep, and you can also, if you don't know where the Q&A is, you can always send a direct message to me as well, I think.
Yes, you should be able to by using that drop down by the 2 and then clicking on Chloe's name.
once you start circling all of the different categories too, you're going to add up the total number in each category as well. Annie, if they're on YouTube, are they able to ask questions as well?
Let me double check on YouTube and see if we've got any questions coming in. Nothing on YouTube yet. We do have a few people watching over there as well.
Annie, if they're on YouTube, are they able to ask questions as well? I had it pulled up to see if there was something too.
Yes.
There's a bit of a delay.
Little bit.
Once you complete, don't forget to put done in the chat box. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. All right, while we're waiting for folks to finish up the categories, I'm gonna go ahead and share the spreadsheet we'll be working from in the chat. Once we get to that point, you're not going to use that spreadsheet. You are going to go File, make a copy, and move it on over into your own drive. Sounds good. Okay. So I'm sorry, Alan said that he's done with the categories, but he's going to add up the dollars after the webinar. You might want to do that even in this next step that we're going to do. So it looks like most people are done. We might have a few people who are still working, but in the meantime, I want you to take a look at those categories and look at that total spend that you have in each of those categories. and compare that to your current list of things that you value and things that you don't value. Within this may lie an opportunity for you to see, okay, when I did this, I saw that I was spending $600 every 2 weeks on eating out, drinking, and being hungover. So that included like ordering in Grubhub and ordering in snacks because I was too hungover to do anything else. So that was one of those things that was a big shocker for me of like, I could do so much with $600. Even in a month, I could do so much with $600. That's a flight. That's a flight to Germany. It's a round trip. That's a huge dent on my car payment. That's, you know, all these sort of things. So this opportunity is kind of one of those things to take a look at and not only recognize where you might have some room to apply to the things that you value most in your life, but also maybe get a little disgusted and a little motivated on the ways that you're spending money. Maybe you guys are not like me and there's absolutely, you're already perfectly aligned with your values, but this is an opportunity for you to take a look at that spending, take a look at those values and say, okay, what do I want to do with this information? How do I want to start reallocating my resources? Am I comfortable with the way that it currently looks? And if not, how do I make a change? So again, with this, goals, I think it's really important to write your goals down. So so for me, my goal is to spend 50% of my income. My goal is also to be debt-free by the time I'm 30. And then I also have a goal of putting $2,000 a month on my debt. So what kind of goals can you make? They can be little and they can be big. I encourage you to think about monthly goals and also about a yearly goal. And as per usual, once you're done, you can go ahead and hit done in there. Another thing about the goals too is even if it's I want to spend less money on buying clothes than I spend on doing activities with my family, or I want to spend more money on debt than I spend on new clothes, or whatever it is that you don't value that you're currently spending money on. All right, and when you're done with that, as per usual, let me know. And then I'll start sharing my screen on the budget. All right, looks like we've got 2 done. Looks like we're waiting on 3 others. All right, cool. So we are going to switch over to actual budgeting right now. So if you haven't already, you do not have to use my spreadsheet. You are more than welcome to use an app if you prefer to use an app. I generally don't use apps because I prefer a good old-fashioned spreadsheet because I found it's the one that's the most customizable to my needs. However, Personal Capital is a great one. You Need a Budget's a great one. Mint's a great one as well. And so however you choose to keep track of your budget, nice thing about using a Google spreadsheet is that you can also have the Google Sheets app on your phone so that you can go in and you can update it as you go. The same way you would an app, only it's a spreadsheet that you can also use on your desktop, which I like. I mentioned Personal Capital, You Need a Budget, and Mint. That was one of the questions in there. You need a budget is the one that I've probably found the most comprehensive. It's really cool. But personal capital, you can also keep track of your goals and your like your net worth and things like that. So it's kind of cool as well. But all right, I am gonna switch over and share a new screen. Okay. All righty. We are gonna look at how to budget using the current Google spreadsheet. If you're using a notebook or anything like that, you can just keep track of it in a similar way, just on a notebook. So this here, your expenses tabs. So here, I'll give you a whole view of this. So the monthly budget, this starting balance, it can be whatever you want it to be. So if you want it to be the total amount of money in your savings, or if you want it to be the total amount of money in your checking, whatever it is, you can keep track of that. I don't really pay attention to that all that much, just because I don't worry about it too much. And I don't have that many accounts that I have to keep track of. But that will update these numbers over here. In this spreadsheet, the only things that you're going to update on the summary page are the things that are orange. Also, if you missed it earlier, this is where you're going to go to make a copy. So file, make a copy, and then it'll be in your own drive, so I won't have access to it. So these are where you're going to enter in those categories. So if you looked at your spending categories and you realize, okay, there's some other ones I want to add in here. I want to add savings. I want to add family time. I want to add new experience. I want to add home improvements. Add in those categories. And then those totals that you created, if you get paid, so this is another thing too. If you want to do a monthly budget, you can do a monthly budget. I recommend doing your budget based off of when you get paid. So I do a bi-weekly budget. So instead of everything saying monthly, I just change it to bi-weekly and I update the dates. You can do, it's not going to change the function of this workbook, of this spreadsheet, but I personally like keeping track of it on a bi-weekly basis because that's how I get paid. So you can do that. If so, you can take a look at your spending report or in your categories and see, okay, do I need to divide this in half? And also, what's an acceptable number? This is what I am currently spending on XYZ, clothes, eating out, drinking, whatever it is. How much do I actually want to be spending on each of these categories? And what do I think is possible? So you're going to go in and enter all of your planned goals for each of those categories. A thing about this, you don't need to have all of your categories in a spreadsheet all the time. So when I update my budget, I look at my calendar and I say, okay, over the next 2 weeks, I'm going to have this many social activities. I know I'm going here and I know I got to go home to cook dinner for my parents. So I'll factor that into my categories. These categories should change. You're not always going to be spending the same amount on gifts every 2 weeks as you would if you have a month with 6 birthdays. So these are always going to change. Your budget is dynamic. And it's also really important, even when you're in a budgeting period. I personally, if you struggle with black and white thinking, as in, as soon as you ruin a diet or you ruin a budget, you immediately are like, screw it. I'm just gonna wait until the next budgeting period because I already ruined it this time. I highly recommend when you go over budget, or when you know, okay, midweek, oh man, I didn't really plan for going out for drinks with my friends. I'm gonna have to adjust this budget. I recommend adjust that plan budget because at least if you go in with a plan, it's easier to stick to that plan without completely blowing the rest of your budget than it is for you to just say, screw it. Well, I spent $60 on drinks that I didn't think I was gonna spend. So now I'm gonna spend $200 on this and $400 on this and yada, yada, yada. So I definitely am one of those people who says, adjust your budget as you go. It's gonna change, especially as you are just starting out. So also over here, you've got your income where you're going to be able to track that income. You can put in, the only reason I would track your income in savings, this is not like your deposits. This is like if you pulled out of savings. in order to cover your expenses. So if you pulled out $1,000 because you need to cover your expenses for a month, then you're going to put it in your income side. And then if you're saving $1,000 a month, you're going to track that as an expense. So it's that idea of paying yourself and treating your savings or your emergency fund or whatever it is, just like any other bill. So I know this can get confusing. So please, if you have any questions, put them in the Q&A, raise your hand, send me a message. And when you're done with the summary page, let me know. Should I be able to save this spreadsheet? How? Yes. So if you're logged into your Google account, you're able to put it into your Google Drive. If you're not, totally fine. You can do download, and you can download it as Microsoft Excel or however you would like to. I would recommend only doing it in Microsoft Excel. If you're logged into Google, you can just make a copy and it'll automatically go into your Drive. You can also, if you go into Google, this is the Google spreadsheet. So if you go into the Google Drive and you type in budget, budget template for the budgeting, this is what will come up. This is also why I like teaching on this, because it's super accessible to everybody. Does that make sense, Vanessa? And did that work for you? Okay, she didn't figure it out, but I can always touch base with you afterwards and make sure that you get it. But yeah, it should just be, can you see my screen, Vanessa? Okay, and it didn't work, make a copy didn't work for you? Thanks, Annie. And I didn't realize that's Vanessa, who I know. Vanessa, hi, Vanessa. All right, well, Annie's gonna email it to you so you'll get it and you'll be able to go in and update it. So for everybody else who's able to in it, and Vanessa, you can watch this, the way that you're gonna keep track of your spending is really simple. You're just gonna put in the date, you're gonna put in the amount of money that you spent, what it was, and then the category. And these categories are automatically gonna update based on how you change your categories on the summary page. And the same thing with your income. You're gonna track that, and then your summary page is going to update. A thing about the description, I think the description is really helpful, especially if you have some goals that you're working towards or you want to keep track of what you're actually spending, because, you know, like when you're looking at your debit card expenses or you're looking at your credit card, they don't say what you bought. They say things like Amazon. And well, is Amazon going to be a category on your budget? Probably not. Unless Amazon is something that you really value, then no judgment here. But likely you ordered something that was grocery or personal or for the house or whatever it was. This makes it a lot easier for you to keep track of that and really identify what you're spending money on. And then how I update this is every time I get paid, the night before will make a copy of the last month's budget. So if it's, say, since I do biweekly, I'll go to, if there's the first of the month chunk and then there's the second half of the month chunk. If I'm going into the first of the month chunk again, I will make a copy of my last first of the month, because it'll have all the same fixed expenses that I have. So it'll have my rent in there, it'll have my student loan payments, it'll have whether or not utilities are going to be in that time period or not. You don't have to do it that way, but I find that that's a really easy way to do it. This too will be exactly the same in the app when you download it on your phone. And again, the app is just Google Sheets. You just have to sign in with your Google account and you'll be able to see all of this, and it'll update live in real time. It's All right, if you have any questions, always feel free to put them in that chat box. And then when everybody's done, we'll move on to the next thing. I've been asked before, how often do I update my budget and how often do I go in and keep track of everything? I am a total money nerd, so I will update it every day, or really every time I spend money. So I find that it's so much easier to just get in the habit of when I spend money, I put it into my budget so that I know what I have left to spend for the next pay period. Alan and Vanessa, Annie just sent her email. So if you're looking for the budget, send her an email and she'll send you a copy of this. And for my YouTubers, this is available on Google Drive. You just go in and you search in the Google Sheets, search for the Google template for budgeting, and it will come right up. You can also visit clobear.com, how to create a budget, and it is in there as well, and there's the link to it. Little plug. Trying to think if there's any other commonly asked questions I get about this. In the resources that I'll send out after this webinar, that Annie will send out after this webinar, I also have links to videos and blog posts on how to update this stuff. And you'll also have my email address, so if you ever have questions too, I can help you directly. All right, so we got Elisa's done. Hannah, Ann, how are you guys doing? I know Vanessa and Alan just got theirs. Any questions so far? Cool, cool. Okay, so since we're getting into 8 o'clock or 8:06, I just want to give you some other tips while we go, but please feel free to keep playing with it. And yeah, Alan, if you run into some issues after the webinar, I will leave up a slide where you guys will have my contact information. So we can always work through that if you need help. One of the things to note about this spreadsheet as well is I do get a question a lot about credit cards. So how do you keep track of your spending if you're spending with credit cards? You will treat your new spending with credit cards like cash. So anytime you swipe your card, whether it's a debit card, credit card, or if you're paying cash, you're going to track it in here as if it were just a cash payment. That way, when you go to pay off your credit card in full at the end of the month, you're not going to have to track it again. The only way that this is different is if you have outstanding credit card debt right now, that debt should go into its own category. So if you have $2,000 at the start of this call and at the start of your budgeting period, you're going to track that as either credit card debt or whatever it is you want to. And then if you're using credit cards to make payments on whether it's another card or whatever, that normal spending is going to just go on that credit card and you're going to pay off that normal credit card spend every month. But that debt that you've got to pay off, that is going to be its own item, if that makes sense. So any questions on how to use this with credit cards? And if credit cards are an issue for you, I do not recommend using credit cards. All right, quiet bunch. Okay, so one of the things I also want to talk about is yearly budgets. So one of the things that I love about budgeting is that it's kind of like a map for the whole year, and I can see my entire categorical spend for the whole year. This is an example of my yearly budget. And the reason I like it is because, and I will again share this spreadsheet with you all, and Annie will share it with you if you do not have access to it in this chat. And it's the same thing. You can make a copy of it. But the reason I like this is because I can keep track of my income goals. I can also keep track of if I'm on track to spend in an alignment with my values. So for example, the things that I value on here, debt, you see is the biggest number on here. You see that my home is also one of the biggest numbers. And then things afterwards are things like travel, and really that's pretty much the biggest. So those are my three values, and I keep track of that. And the reason I like this is it's like a map to your entire year of spending. And every month that you create a budget, it's like the baby steps to make sure you're still staying in line. It's also nice because if I go over budget, I can then adjust my spending for the next couple of months based off of how much I went over budget. So I used to, before I ever implemented a yearly budget, I would just overspend and be like, okay, well, next month I'll get it. And then I would spend the normal amount of next month. But when you do that month after month, it just adds up and then you completely overspend in a certain category. This is really nice because it kind of is a reminder of, okay, you spent $400 more last month than you were supposed to in groceries. You should probably try to spend less in groceries if you still want to stick to your final goal. The nice thing too is with this spreadsheet is you can go in and you can add a comment. So say I went over budget by $100 and then I can only spend $90 for the rest of the month, then I'll just update this and say, okay, Chloe, your new bi-weekly goal is $90, and then that'll continue. So it's a great way to stay on track, especially if you have some big goals that you want to keep track of. But it's also just nice because it's a home for all of your categories. So I don't have a category for taxes and these are the taxes that I had to pay to the government when I did my taxes, this is all post-tax income. But I don't have a keyboard on there every 2 weeks, but this is a way for me to keep track of my entire spending for the year. I also like it because I have a goal of spending less than 50% of my income. So I can take a look and see, okay, am I spending less than 50% of my income after I take out that debt? So it's a nice tool. It's definitely something that I recommend using if you're serious about your budgeting goals. It's not required, but I do also have a blog post on how to use a yearly budget and why I think it's important. So same thing here, you're just gonna make a copy of that, or Annie will also send it to you in a follow-up email, and it'll be in my resources as well. So the nice thing too, with this, all you gotta do is copy and paste your transactions into here. So whenever you complete a monthly budget, you just copy and paste all those transactions, dump them into here, and make sure you're dumping in your income goals or income as well. You don't have to dump every single transaction if you don't want to. You can also just, you can just do the category. So you just put the date, the total amount for everything that you spent in that one category, and then, you know, the description could be July 2020 transportation, and then your category would be accordingly. So, all right, we have about 18 minutes left. So I'm gonna go back over to my dog is just making all the noise in the background. She's aggressively eating her foot. Okay, so these are some of my tips for staying on budget. One of the big things for me is meal prepping. I don't know if any of you are shopping at Aldi, but if you're not shopping at Aldi, I highly recommend it. It is about 70% cheaper than Jewel. And it's just, there's no cheaper place. I also think that meal prepping in general makes it a lot easier to stay the course. So I'm also a huge fan of drinking in and not drinking out. It saves a crap ton of money. Obviously, I also focus on not eating out. You'll receive all of this too in the follow-up. So I'm just gonna breeze right on through this so that we can get to different ways of paying off debt. So there are several different philosophies for paying off debt. One that you've probably heard of a lot is the debt snowball by Dave Ramsey. That's actually how I got started with budgeting, is just paying off the smallest one first, and then using that money that I was spending on that car payment and transferring it over to my student loans once that got paid off. This one's really good from a psychological standpoint because it helps people stay motivated, whereas the debt avalanche sometimes can be hard to stick to because you're paying off the highest interest first, and the highest interest may not be the smallest amount of debt either. This is really smart from a numbers standpoint, because if you have a credit card that has 20% interest that you're paying on, your biggest goal should probably be to pay off that credit card debt, because 20% is a huge amount of money that's going towards that interest fee. The consolidation and refinancing is always an option as well. And then there's always the option of making minimum payments and investing the rest. I really only recommend making minimum payments and investing the rest if your interest rate is under 5%. The reason I say that is because investing often will give you a 7% return minimum over the course of 100 years. The average is at least 7% per year, especially if you're investing in low-cost index funds. The thing is about personal finance and paying off debt and all of this is it's very personal. So if one of these is the mode that you're going to stick to the most, that's the mode I probably recommend to you. Because even if the debt snowball is not necessarily mathematically the smartest thing to do, if that's the one you're going to stick to and you're going to fail at the debt avalanche, I definitely recommend focusing on this one. And speaking of investing versus debt payoff, again, if your interest rate is lower than 4 to 5%, mathematically speaking, you're probably better off investing that money instead, while contributing to make your minimum payments on your debt, because the stock market on average returns 7%, or the opportunity cost of other investments that you could be making. Like I invest in real estate, and I would not be able to get those returns if I was focusing only on spending my money on things like debt payoff. Again, though, it really truly depends on your risk preference. So my risk preference is very high because I am a single woman who lives alone with my dog and I don't have anybody that I'm responsible for. Your risk preference might be, oh, I have 2 kids at home and I also just lost my job. So that could be very different for you than it is for me. But it all depends on what your ability to handle risk is. I just had a whole slide, but again, you'll get this in the packet. If you have high interest credit card debt, I generally recommend that should be your first concern. Once you have about $1,000 in an emergency fund saved, then I would tackle this above all else. And that's just because that credit card debt is so hard to get out of with the 20% APRs and things like that you've got going on. I will also include a link to different ways to pay off credit card debt and different approaches. So it'll go deeper into different ways to pay off credit card debt, like reconsolidating, using zero balance transfers. Logan's tired of this talk. She's ready to play. As well as using alternative methods like getting personal loans and pulling out of your 401k. So let's talk a little bit about investing priorities. So I'm not a financial advisor, so I do not recommend particular stocks, but I do recommend investing in general in index funds, especially low cost index funds. But there's so many different ways to invest. And what I want to cover here is what your priorities of investment should be if you're just getting started. So one, if you do not have credit card debt, or if you have credit card debt, focus on that first. Once you pay off that credit card debt, I would start looking into these investment opportunities. However, even with credit card debt, if you have a 401k at work, you should be getting that match, because that match is free money, and not taking that is just leaving money on the table. So even if you have credit card debt, make sure you're getting that 401k match. Then if you do not have credit card debt, you can move on to tier 2, where you're maxing out your tax advantaged accounts every year. And we'll dive a little bit more into what those maxes are in the next slide. But that's your 401k, your Roth IRA if you make less than $124,000 a year, and your traditional IRA. And then after that, I recommend investing in those low cost index funds. Those are some examples. The FIRE community loves the VTSAX, but there's lots of different options out there. And what index funds are is basically they represent the market and in whatever market that you're in. So there's health market index funds, there are S&P 500 index funds, there are small cap, large cap. Those are all different markets, and the index funds are going to represent those markets and what the average returns are in that market. So basically, when you buy an index fund, you're purchasing a bunch of different companies within one market. That's why I like it. It's low cost, it's already diversified, and you're pretty much buying into the biggest companies within that market that are going to continue to do well. So these are the different retirement accounts. So if you do not make more than $124,000 a year, I definitely recommend maxing out your Roth IRA. The reason that it's so great is that when you pull the money out, you've already paid your taxes on it when you put this money into your Roth IRA. And when you pull it out, you won't have to pay taxes again. The reason this is good is, especially if you're young and you're early in your career, your tax rate is probably a lot lower than what it's going to be when you retire. And so in a way, it's like free money. So it's also, what's nice is that you can contribute. I don't know if anybody did this, but you could contribute to your 2019 Roth IRA up until a couple of weeks ago. But now you can also contribute $6,000 in 2020 to a Roth IRA. And within that Roth IRA, which you can open either through your work, if you have a brokerage account for their 401k, or you can just open up a Vanguard brokerage account or a Fidelity account. Those are generally the two that I like the best. And you just pick some index funds in that Roth IRA account. For traditional IRA, very similar. The contributions are tax deductible, but when you pull the money out, you will be taxed at your current income rate that you are pulling it out of at the time. I can't remember how old, but I believe it's in your 60s or 70s, 65 and a half maybe. But they do lower your taxable annual gross income, which is nice. And again, on that one, your maximum contribution is $6,000. So the 401k is different because it's completely tied to your work. So if you don't open up a 401k on your own, but you can put your money in there tax free. You will be taxed on it when you pull it out, but your employer match doesn't count towards that maximum contribution that you can put in there. And you do reduce your taxable income when you contribute to it. And then maximum is $19,500 in 2020. So that's kind of like investment accounts for retirement 101. I know we're going through this quickly, but does anybody have any questions on that? Nope. Okay. All right. So we have time now for some questions. We've got a few minutes left. If you have questions on credit card debt payment, what I think about refinancing or reconsolidating, this is your opportunity. I am also offering a free 30-minute call to anybody on this call. So you're more than welcome to send me an email. And that's pretty much it for tonight. We went through a lot, but if you're having any issues with that budgeting spreadsheet or whatever, feel free to shoot me an email and we can do a quick little consultation.
Thank you so much, Chloe. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to put those in the chat or use the Q&A box, and then I'll read them aloud.
And thanks for joining too, if anybody is dropping.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you know anybody else who would benefit from this, it is available on YouTube. Most of our programs are available after the fact. If you go to schaumburglibrary.tv, it's a custom URL that you can go to access our YouTube channel, and a lot of our programs are available on there as well.
All right, and then there's just more information on how to support Clover. I do obviously give workshops, and yeah, I have a blog and a YouTube channel as well. All right, thanks guys.
Thank you, everybody.
All right.
Hi, Hannah. You're very welcome. Thank you, everybody.
All right. Looks like
All right.
people are dropping off. Thank you all.
Good. Take care.
All right. Bye.